Are you ready to learn the whole truth about that fateful day that forever and irrevocably changed the political map of Europe? We often think that history moves slowly, but sometimes the fate of entire nations is decided in just a few hours of one dramatic battle. The events we are about to discuss became a real watershed between the era of legends and the beginning of a new state structure. That fine September morning in northern England initially promised only a dull and peaceful collection of taxes from the conquered territories. However, it suddenly turned into the crushing collapse of the great and frightening era of sea kings, which had kept the entire coast in fear for centuries. None of those involved in the events even suspected that this day would mark the end of the history of the great conquests of the Northerners. The situation was complicated by the fact that the Viking forces were divided by the river, and a significant part of their warriors could not quickly join the battle. Panic ensued, and the once disciplined ranks turned into a chaotic mass of people trying to save their lives. Every meter of English soil now had to be defended without reliable armor, relying only on the strength of their hands and the fury of despair. Watch this video to the end, and you will learn how a single narrow wooden bridge became an insurmountable obstacle for an entire army of conquerors. You will understand how the heroism of just one man was able to temporarily halt the advance of thousands of soldiers and give the defenders a chance for a great victory. I will reveal the best-kept secret of that warm autumn morning. The army of the famous Harold the Terrible was camped on the banks of the River Derwent, completely relaxed. The warriors were enjoying the unseasonably warm weather. Heavy iron chainmail was left far behind on the decks of wooden drakkers. The Northerners took with them only light weapons and helmets for the formal acceptance of the local population's surrender. This tactical decision was their first and most important mistake that day. The landscape around the river consisted of flat green meadows with no natural cover. The River Derwent divided the army into two unequal parts. The smaller group was on the west bank, awaiting the arrival of carts with tribute. The main forces were resting on the east bank, divided into small groups. Between them lay the only communication route in the form of a narrow wooden bridge. Strategically, this position was extremely vulnerable to a surprise attack. The weather played a treacherous ally for the defenders of England. The bright sun blinded the eyes of the Northerners resting in the meadows. The hot air distorted the perspective on the horizon, hiding the approaching danger. Only a small cloud of dust in the distance caught the attention of some of the sentries. At first, it was mistaken for the long-awaited supply wagons from the local lords. No one expected to see the glint of thousands of steel helmets in this veil of dust. Harold Godwinson's army accomplished a true miracle of military logistics for that time. They covered hundreds of kilometers in a matter of days along the old Roman roads. This grueling march demanded tremendous endurance from every Anglo-Saxon militiaman. The warriors carried heavy shields, long spears, and supplies. Strict discipline and an understanding of the deadly threat drove them forward without long stops. They approached Stamford Bridge in a state of extreme physical exhaustion, but fully prepared for battle. The situation on the west bank of the river became critical in the first few minutes. The Northmen began a hasty retreat to the narrow wooden bridge. It was their only chance to join the main forces on the other side. The Anglo-Saxons methodically pressed the enemy using the tactic of a dense wall of shields. The long spears of England's defenders left no chance for the lightly armed Scandinavians. The struggle for the key strategic point of the entire area began. This moment became a turning point in the history of the early Middle Ages. Never before had the Scandinavian military machine found itself in such a disadvantageous position. Their famous tactic of sudden raids turned against them. Now they were the defenders of a foreign land, caught off guard. The outcome of the confrontation depended on the Anglo-Saxons' ability to quickly cross the water barrier. We would love to hear your opinion. What do you think about the role of logistics in military campaigns of the past? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion helps us create more in-depth historical analyses. Subscribe to our channel to receive high-quality content on a regular basis. Together, we can uncover even more secrets of great battles. Are you ready for the shocking truth about one man's heroism? The fate of the entire battle was focused on a narrow wooden bridge across the River Derwent. Harold Godwinson's huge army could not move forward because of this narrow bottleneck. The width of the structure allowed only a few people to pass at a time. The Anglo-Saxon vanguard rushed to the crossing to capture a foothold on the eastern bank. At that moment, a single Scandinavian warrior of enormous stature stood in their way. This unknown hero took up a position at the narrowest point of the bridge. He was armed with a long battle axe that required incredible physical strength to wield. The wide blade of this weapon could pierce wooden shields with a single blow. The warrior used the bridge structure as his personal fortress. The railings and narrow space prevented the Anglo-Saxons from flanking him. The attackers were forced to attack him head-on, one or two at a time. Time was working against the Anglo-Saxon army. Every minute of delay at the bridge allowed the main army of the Northmen to build a reliable wall of shields on the opposite bank. Harold Godwinson understood the strategic importance of a quick breakthrough. He sent his most experienced and heavily armed warriors to the bridge. However, even the elite infantry could not break the resistance of a lone defender. The tactical superiority of the narrow space negated any numerical advantage of the attackers. For the Northerners on the eastern bank, this feat became a powerful source of inspiration. They gained precious time to form battle lines on the hill. The warriors hastily lined up shoulder to shoulder, creating a continuous formation. King Harold Fairhair personally directed the deployment of forces moving along the line. They tried to compensate for their lack of heavy armor with the density of their ranks and the depth of their formation. The heroism of their comrade on the bridge gave them confidence in their ability to repel the attack. Meanwhile, the grueling confrontation continued on the bridge. The lone Norse warrior methodically repelled the attacks, using the full length of his heavy axe. The Anglo-Saxons tried to pelt him with javelins from the shore, but the distance was too great for an accurate throw. The wooden railing of the bridge served as additional protection from flying projectiles. The attackers' forces were exhausted by their inability to deliver a decisive blow in such a confined space. The River Derwent became an insurmountable obstacle for an entire army due to one man's clever use of the landscape. The Anglo-Saxon command realized that direct attacks on the bridge were futile. A cunning plan was devised to remove the obstacle from an unexpected direction. One of the warriors quietly descended into the river and climbed into a small wooden boat. The current slowly carried him right under the bridge structure. The defender above was too busy repelling frontal attacks and did not notice the threat from below. The gaps between the planks of the deck were wide enough to deliver a precise spear strike. The fall of the bridge defender opened the way for a decisive clash between the two great armies. The Anglo-Saxons lined up at the foot of the hill, preparing for a difficult climb. How could one man change the tactical pattern of an entire battle simply by choosing the right position on a narrow bridge? In the next chapter, we will examine the unique mechanics of the Scandinavian formation, which turned ordinary people into an impenetrable living fortress. The secret passed down from generation to generation is hidden in the geometry of ancient warfare. The Scandinavian shield wall was not just a crowd of people, but a complex tactical mechanism. Each warrior in this formation performed a strictly defined function depending on his position. The strongest and heaviest infantrymen with large round shields were always placed in the front row. Their task was to withstand the enormous physical pressure of the enemy and keep a straight line. It was this front line that took the initial blow of the advancing enemy formation. The shields of the Northerners were made of light but tough linden or fir wood. In the center of each shield was an iron umbo that protected the warrior's wrist. The edges were covered with rawhide, which tightened the wood and prevented it from splitting under heavy impact. In close formation, the shields overlapped each other like fish scales. The left side of each shield covered the right side of its neighbor, creating a continuous wooden barrier. This design had remarkable elasticity and the ability to absorb the kinetic energy of a frontal attack. The rear ranks of the formation played an equally important role in ensuring stability. They physically supported the backs of their comrades in front, preventing the formation from buckling under pressure. At the moment of collision with the enemy, the entire mass of the rear ranks rushed forward, creating enormous pressure. In addition, the rear fighters replaced the tired warriors of the front line. This ensured constant rotation and preservation of the integrity of the defensive perimeter. The entire structure functioned as a single living organism, responding to changes in the situation. The lack of chainmail among the Scandinavians that day made their wall of shields extremely vulnerable. Leather jackets and thick tunics could not provide adequate protection against the long Anglo-Saxon spears. Therefore, the density of the formation became vitally important for them. Any breach in the wall immediately led to a breakthrough in the defense and the collapse of the entire line. Harold the Terrible ordered his warriors to stand as close together as possible, pressing against each other. They understood that the safety of each individual depended on the strength of their neighbors on the right and left. The hilly terrain gave the Scandinavians a slight advantage in this positional battle. The Anglo-Saxons had to advance uphill, expending extra energy on the difficult climb. The Northerners, on the other hand, could put the energy of their movement from top to bottom into their strikes and thrusts. This difference in height compensated for the defenders' lack of armor. Harold Godwinson was in no hurry to throw all his forces into a decisive attack. He methodically wore down his opponent with constant pressure across the entire front. The Anglo-Saxon commanders used fresh troops to maintain a high tempo of attack. They withdrew tired units to the rear and replaced them with reserves full of strength. The Scandinavians on the hill were deprived of this opportunity due to their limited numbers. Their ranks were dwindling and physical fatigue was accumulating with every minute under the scorching sun. The heat became their worst enemy, sapping their strength faster than hard labor. Dehydration and tension slowly destroyed the monolithic nature of their living fortress. The genius of this formation lay in its simplicity and reliability in all conditions. If you enjoyed this detailed analysis of ancient tactics, be sure to like this video. Your support helps us create even more high-quality historical reconstructions. Share this video with your friends who are interested in military history and strategies of the past. Together, we can bring the truth about great events to a wide audience. Guess what happened next on that dusty hill under the scorching sun? The hours-long standoff between the two walls of shields reached an exhausting stalemate. The Anglo-Saxons continued to press from below, but could not break through the dense ranks of the defenders. The Northmen desperately held their defense, conserving their strength and hoping for a miracle. Both sides were exhausted by the scorching sun and continuous physical exertion. The battlefield had become an arena for testing human endurance to its limits. Harold Fairhair understood that passive defense would sooner or later lead to defeat. His troops lacked fresh water and reserves to hold their positions indefinitely. He decided to undertake a risky tactical maneuver to seize the initiative. The idea was to feign a retreat by the center of the formation in order to lure the enemy into a trap. This was a classic technique of the Scandinavian military school, requiring perfect coordination between all commanders. In conditions of loud noise and confusion, it was extremely difficult to convey such an order. At that moment, the flanks of the Scandinavian army were supposed to close behind the backs of the Anglo-Saxons who had broken through. However, physical exhaustion and the lack of armor played a cruel joke on the Northerners. They lacked the speed and mass to carry out a swift encirclement. The Anglo-Saxon commanders noticed the danger in time and ordered their warriors to stop. The disciplined elite troops quickly regrouped and restored a solid line of defense. Harold the Terrible's risky maneuver failed, leaving his own formation in disarray. Suddenly, a stray arrow shot at random from the rear ranks reached its target. It struck the leader of the Northerners, ending his life in an instant. The fall of the legendary ruler caused shock among his closest associates. The banner tilted and nearly fell to the trampled ground. News of the loss of their leader spread like wildfire throughout the Scandinavian army. This event dealt a crushing blow to the morale of the defenders. Many warriors threw down their weapons and began to retreat to the river in search of salvation. The united army turned into a disorganized crowd, pursued by the advancing enemy. However, a small group of the most loyal fighters remained to defend the body of their king. They closed their shields around their fallen leader, ready to stand to the end. Harold Godwinson offered them an honorable surrender and unhindered passage to the coast. The Scandinavians rejected this offer, preferring to share the fate of their commander. The final phase of the battle for control of the hilltop began. The Anglo-Saxons methodically suppressed the remnants of resistance, tightening the ring around the banner. The defenders' tenacity was impressive, but their forces were too unequal. Fatigue, thirst, and the realization of inevitable defeat took their toll. By midday, the hill had been completely cleared of the main Scandinavian forces. The battle seemed to have been won by the valiant troops of King Harold Godwinson. The surviving remnants of the Northern Army fled in panic back to their ships on the coast. The Anglo-Saxons celebrated their victory, surveying the battlefield and collecting rich trophies. But was this really the end of the large-scale battle? In the next chapter, you will learn how unexpected reinforcements from the coast attempted to change the course of history in the final hours of this unbearably long day. While tragedy unfolded on the hill, messengers reached the Scandinavian ships. They brought alarming news of a sudden attack by a huge Anglo-Saxon army. The fleet commander, Eystein Ori, immediately ordered all available warriors to don heavy armor. Several thousand armed Norsemen hastily left their wooden ships. They had to cover more than 20 kilometers in full combat gear under the scorching sun. This forced march went down in history as one of the most severe tests of endurance. Speed was critical to rescuing their comrades on the River Derwent. Eystein Ori's warriors ran in iron chainmail, suffocating from the heat. The metal rings heated up in the sun, turning the armor into red-hot furnaces. The weight of their equipment, shields, and thick underarm jackets sapped their last strength with every step. Many fainted on the spot, unable to withstand the heat stroke. Those who remained on their feet stubbornly continued forward, driven by a sense of duty. The appearance of the armed reserve caused a momentary confusion in the Anglo-Saxon ranks. Harold Godwinson was forced to rearrange his troops into the correct battle formation. Eystein Ori rallied the survivors of the first phase of the battle and the newly arrived fighters around him. They picked up the fallen banner and raised it high above their ranks. The second, no less intense phase of the great battle at Stamford Bridge began. The fresh Anglo-Saxon forces clashed with the armored but incredibly exhausted Vikings. The physical condition of the reinforcements played a cruel joke on them at the decisive moment. Exhausted by the frantic march, the warriors could barely stand on their feet. Due to the intense heat and dehydration, many of the northerners, in a fit of despair, threw off their protective chainmail. They stood before a wall of enemy spears in nothing but their shirts, completely depriving themselves of the advantage of their armor. This bout of mass madness went down in the historical chronicles as the Ori Storm. Their insane bravery could not compensate for their lack of strength and tactical organization. By evening, the resistance of the reinforcements had been completely broken by the Anglo-Saxon troops. Eystein Ori fell in battle, defending the banner of his fallen suzerain to the end. The remaining Scandinavians rushed in disorganized flight to the safety of their ships. The Anglo-Saxon cavalry pursued the retreating enemy to the very coast. The road back turned into a real logistical disaster for the remnants of the great army. English warriors caught up with the stragglers and exhausted northerners along the entire route. Of the hundreds of ships that had arrived to conquer England, only 24 sailed back. Harold Godwinson showed tactical mercy to the young son of Harald Hardrada, allowing him to take the remnants of the fleet away. The Scandinavians made a solemn vow never to attack English lands again. This vow marked the formal end of the era of the great campaigns of the Sea Kings. The once invincible military machine was completely disorganized in a single battle. The threat from the north, which had terrorized Europe for centuries, was finally eliminated. News of the brilliant victory quickly spread throughout the island. Local residents returned to their homes with relief, confident in the security of their borders. Militias prepared to rest and return to their autumn fieldwork. The army set up camp to replenish supplies and regain strength. However, this well-deserved triumph turned out to be only a brief respite before a major crisis. The southern shores of England were already shrouded in fog, hiding the sails of a new, even more organized threat. What I am about to show you breaks the usual notions of historical justice. The triumph of Harold Godwinson's army in the north was only the beginning of a chain of fateful events. The joy of victory over the Scandinavians was suddenly interrupted by the arrival of a harried messenger from the south coast. He brought news that sent a chill through the entire leadership of the Anglo-Saxon forces. The huge fleet of the Norman Duke William had landed unopposed on the shores of Sussex. All the incredible logistical work of the Anglo-Saxons now had to be repeated in reverse. The army was in a state of extreme physical and moral exhaustion after a grueling battle. The soldiers had spent all their energy reserves and needed a long rest to recover. The militias from the northern counties did not want to go south, leaving their lands behind. Harold Godwinson was faced with an impossible choice: to give the army a rest or to immediately march out to meet the new enemy. He made a decision that went down in history as an example of unprecedented determination. The king ordered his exhausted troops to prepare for a new march south. Meanwhile, William the Conqueror was strengthening his foothold on the southern coast of England. His army consisted of professional mercenaries, heavily armored cavalry, and skilled archers from all over Europe. They had fresh forces at their disposal, excellent supplies, and a carefully thought-out campaign plan. The Normans methodically ravaged the surrounding lands, provoking Harold Godwinson into hasty action. William wanted to force his opponent into a decisive battle before the Anglo-Saxons could gather new forces. The tactic of destruction was ruthless, but extremely effective from a military point of view. The two great armies met on Senlac Hill near the town of Hastings. The Anglo-Saxons took up an advantageous defensive position on the hill, building their famous wall of shields. The Normans positioned themselves in the lowlands, preparing for a heavy assault on the enemy's fortified positions. Two completely different military doctrines clashed in a decisive battle for control of the island. On one side was traditional infantry, on the other, a modern European army. This battle was to be the culmination of the most tense year in the country's logistics. The Anglo-Saxon wall of shields once again demonstrated its incredible strength and tactical effectiveness. The Norman archers could not pierce the dense wooden barrier with their arrows. William's heavy cavalry rolled back again and again from the impenetrable formation. Exhausted by two forced marches, the veterans of Stamford Bridge confidently repelled all attacks by the fresh enemy. Throughout the day, the initiative swung from one side to the other in an exhausting battle of position. The defenders' discipline seemed unshakable, despite the extreme physical fatigue of each warrior. The denouement came because of the same tactical ploy that the Northerners had tried to use a few weeks earlier. William used a feigned retreat of his forces to lure the enemy from their advantageous high ground. Part of the Anglo-Saxon militia could not withstand the pressure and rushed into a disorganized attack down the slope. The Norman troops instantly turned and crushed their pursuers in the open field. The wall of shields collapsed, opening the way for the Normans into the very heart of the Anglo-Saxon ranks. The fate of the battle and the entire country was decided in that brief moment of strict discipline being broken. King Harold was defeated, defending his position to the last alongside his loyal warriors. The Norman conquest forever changed the culture, language, and social structure of Britain. Do you think Harold Godwinson could have won at Hastings if he had had time to rest? In the next chapter, we will take a detailed look at how the daily lives of ordinary people changed after these momentous events. The defeat at Hastings was a direct consequence of the exhaustion of the Anglo-Saxon army after Stamford Bridge. Two large-scale logistical maneuvers and battles within 3 weeks proved to be an impossible task. The strategic initiative finally passed into the hands of the Norman conquerors led by William. The old Anglo-Saxon ruling elite was almost completely removed from power in these conflicts. The surviving lords were stripped of their landholdings in favor of the Norman nobility. An era of profound social change and fundamental restructuring of the entire state apparatus of England began. William the Conqueror began a large-scale consolidation of his power in the captured territories. Throughout the country, the construction of grandiose stone castles, previously unseen in these lands, began. These strongholds served as strongholds of the new administration and symbols of Norman domination. The common Anglo-Saxons were forced to work on the construction of these monumental structures for their new rulers. Stone walls forever changed the architectural landscape of the island, replacing traditional wooden buildings. Castles became centers of control, resource collection, and suppression of any attempts at resistance. The language barrier reinforced the social distance between the conquerors and the conquered people. The Norman elite used a French dialect, while the common people communicated in Old English. Court proceedings and government affairs were conducted in a dialect that was incomprehensible to most of the population. This created fertile ground for numerous administrative barriers on the part of the new officials. The Anglo-Saxons felt alienated from the government of their own land. The process of merging the two cultures would take many centuries and give rise to a completely new language. The Norman military machine was based on knightly troops, which required enormous logistical costs. Peasant communities were obliged to provide the troops with food, transport, and high-quality ammunition. This duty placed a heavy burden on the productive capacity of rural settlements. Blacksmiths and craftsmen worked at maximum capacity, fulfilling orders for feudal arsenals. Military affairs turned from the duty of free militiamen into the profession of a narrow caste. The old traditions of popular assembly were forgotten and replaced by a strict vassal hierarchy. The spiritual and administrative life of the country also underwent significant changes under pressure from the crown. William the Conqueror methodically replaced local officials with his loyal supporters from the continent. Old statutes were revised and land wealth was redistributed in favor of the new appointees. Majestic stone structures were erected, overwhelming in their monumental scale. New institutions became an important tool for ideological control and legitimization of the new power. Religious and secular bureaucracy became closely intertwined, serving the interests of the Norman elite. Despite the harsh conditions, the local population found ways to preserve their identity. People secretly kept part of their harvest, evaded labor duties, and ignored the new rules. Images of heroes challenging the strict sheriffs began to appear in folklore. These stories kept up the spirit of national unity and hope for keeping traditions alive in the future. The cultural code of the Anglo-Saxons went deep underground in the daily routine of peasant life. Traditions were passed on away from the eyes of Norman overseers and inspectors. The events of 1066 closed a grand circle of sweeping changes in the British Isles. The era that began with the landing of the Roman legions ended with the arrival of the Norman administrators. Stamford Bridge became the last great court of the passing era of free militias and Scandinavian fleets. This bridge will forever remain a symbol of incredible resilience and a complex logistical challenge. History has shown that even the most outstanding victories can be only the beginning of new trials. England entered a new, strictly organized phase of its historical development. Although the era of mass expeditions had officially ended, the influence of northern culture lived on. Scandinavian navigators left an indelible mark on European engineering, geography, and shipbuilding. Their shipbuilding technology was decades ahead of its time, setting standards for the entire continent. The design of the long drakkar, with its shallow draft, allowed it to navigate both the sea and rivers with equal success. This versatility made their fleet an unrivaled tool for trade and logistics. European shipyards continued to copy the elegant and sleek lines of these wooden hulls for a long time. Their society was organized on the principles of participation and strict codes of conduct. Assemblies of free men, known as ting, decided key issues of justice and community governance. At these assemblies, every full member had a vote and could defend their economic interests. This system laid the early foundations for representative government in the countries of Northern Europe. Scandinavian laws were clearly worded and based on a system of complex compensation. Respect for contracts was an integral part of their worldview in the areas of trade and law. The engineering skills of the Northerners were evident not only in shipbuilding, but also in the creation of camps. They were able to quickly erect complex fortifications made of earth and wood to protect their resources. The famous circular fortresses demonstrate remarkable precision in planning and a deep understanding of geometry. These structures served as training bases and winter quarters for huge logistics groups. The symmetrical arrangement of buildings and powerful ramparts indicate a high level of centralized planning. Architectural pragmatism was the hallmark of Scandinavian organization. Scandinavian craftsmanship was renowned for its style and incredible technique. Blacksmiths forged magnificent tools and parts, decorating them with intricate patterns made of durable alloys. Woodworkers covered ships and buildings with intricate carvings, demonstrating their level of skill. These items were not only utilitarian, but also had high status significance for their owners. Jewelry often served as an equivalent of money in complex trade transactions. The aesthetics of the Northerners were inextricably linked to their understanding of the quality and durability of materials. The organization of the Norse expeditions enriched European thought with the concept of mobile logistics. They demonstrated that speed of maneuver could compensate for any numerical advantages of the enemy. Their ability to quickly move significant volumes of cargo by water changed the principles of European supply. Many rulers were forced to build a network of fortified bases to protect their internal trade routes. The experience of interacting with the Scandinavian system served as a catalyst for infrastructure development in the Middle Ages. The influence of their methods was felt in the economy for many decades after the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The legacy of maritime explorers has been preserved in the geographical names of many European regions. Hundreds of villages and settlements in Great Britain bear names with direct Scandinavian roots. Normandy in northern France was named after the Scandinavian settlers who settled there. Even in distant lands, many names preserve the memory of Scandinavian traders and engineers. This integration testifies to the deep penetration of their technologies into the fabric of European society. They did not simply visit new lands, but actively developed infrastructure in new territories. The Battle of Stamford Bridge was the symbolic end of a grand historical process. The era of large-scale population movements by sea gave way to a new territorial order. The Scandinavian regions gradually integrated into the pan-European political and economic system. The enormous energy of this society was directed toward the internal development of its own industries. However, the fruits of their early technological breakthroughs remain forever at the heart of European infrastructure. Their journey from bold navigators to founders of new trade networks is a unique example of development. The great victory at Stamford Bridge was achieved thanks to a structure that differed from that of continental Europe. The basis of Harold Godwinson's army was the fyrd, a system of universal conscription of trained men. Every landowner was obliged to respond to the call with equipment appropriate to his social status. This system made it possible to gather huge numbers of people to carry out large-scale tasks in the shortest possible time. The militia possessed basic skills in military formation and obeyed strict local subordination. Their motivation to defend their own resources made them an incredibly organized force in defensive formations. The elite of the Anglo-Saxon order were the housecarls, professional troops of the king and senior leaders. They were highly trained specialists whose main occupation was security and military affairs. They received resources, the best equipment, and heavy protective gear to work effectively in formation. The housecarls formed the front lines of the shield wall, ensuring maximum stability for the entire formation. The discipline of these men was exemplary. They strictly adhered to contracts and orders. Their steadfastness was Harold Godwinson's main asset in all his logistical operations. The equipment of the Anglo-Saxon militia was functional and adapted for close formation. The main weapon of the ordinary soldier was a long spear with a sturdy iron tip. Spears allowed them to keep their distance and work collectively behind a dense wooden barrier. In close combat, heavy tools with excellent cutting properties were used. Professional housecarls preferred two-handed axes, adopted from their Scandinavian neighbors. The design of this tool allowed it to break through the strongest defenses when applied with the right amount of force. The system of communication and coordination of actions was based on simple and understandable visual signals. The main landmarks were the banners and marks of the commanders, towering above the dense formation of people. The king's banner indicated the location of the command center and the direction of the main vector of movement. Sound signals were given with horns, whose rhythm set the pace or gave commands. In conditions of loud background noise, these ancient methods of communication remained the most reliable. Training in signal recognition was a mandatory part of the preparation of even a simple participant in the gathering. The role of ranged weapons in the Anglo-Saxon system of 1066 was secondary. People with such equipment were recruited from segments of the population who could not afford heavy shields. They were positioned behind the main line and fired overhead at the advancing ranks. The bows of that time were relatively simple and did not have much penetrating power against armor. Commanders preferred to rely on the density of the main formation rather than on range methods. This prioritization became another vulnerability in the face of continental technologies. Relations between the simple militia and professional personnel were based on strict subordination. Ordinary participants in the gathering saw heavily equipped veterans as a reliable organizational support. At critical moments, professionals took on the most difficult tasks, stabilizing the situation. Commanders tried to distribute experienced specialists evenly along the entire line to maintain general order. This symbiosis of experience and massiveness made the Anglo-Saxon system effective for its time. Their unity was cemented by a common understanding of the task and a strict vertical chain of command. Medical care was basic and depended on traditional methods. Specialists used available materials and clean water to treat injuries. The effectiveness of the assistance directly depended on the speed of the medics immediately after the end of the active phase. Field camps after large-scale transitions required enormous efforts to restore people's physical condition. Limited resources made even slight fatigue a potential threat to the fulfillment of the plan. The task of restoring strength often fell on the shoulders of the local infrastructure of the nearest settlements. The Ferd system reached its peak of logistical development in 1666. Successful marches across the country and the victory at Stamford Bridge were a triumph for this organizational model. However, it could not withstand the clash with the Normans' new feudal system of resource distribution. The replacement of key Anglo-Saxon management personnel led to a complete restructuring of the old administrative machine. The traditions of free assemblies were replaced by professional contractors and a rigid reporting system. The memory of the great Ferde assemblies has been preserved only in old records and dry chronicles. The historical significance of the victory at Stamford Bridge is often lost in the shadow of the subsequent events at Hastings. Nevertheless, this clash is a brilliant example of the triumph of logistics, planning, and discipline. Harold Godwinson demonstrated outstanding organizational skills by executing an unprecedented strategic maneuver. His ability to secretly move a huge number of people over a tremendous distance was the key to success. The element of complete surprise deprived his opponent of the opportunity to use his technical advantages. It was a triumph of calculation, coordination, and incredible endurance of human resources. The episode on the wooden bridge will forever remain a symbol of the importance of the correct use of spatial geometry. One specialist in an advantageous position was able to stop the advance of the entire mass and give his forces time. This case is studied as a classic example of creating an artificial tactical barrier on a route. The physical endurance of one person multiplied by the characteristics of the landscape had an incredible strategic effect. This proves that a competent choice of position can negate the overwhelming numerical superiority of an opponent. The effectiveness of this decision commands professional respect regardless of the historical context. The actions of the parties became a vivid demonstration of the effectiveness of dense formations in confined spaces. The wall of shields proved to be a perfect defense mechanism, requiring phenomenal coordination of elements. The ability to maintain order under continuous physical pressure became the highest manifestation of team discipline. The outcome of many hours of positional confrontation depended solely on collective will and the strength of the connection. It was a time when results were achieved by the direct application of force by thousands of people in a narrow area. The formation is now a thing of the past, but the principles of collective responsibility remain fundamental to any structure. The events in northern England underscore the critical importance of preliminary data collection in all conditions. The absence of distant observers allowed a huge crowd of people to get close to the vacationers' positions. The information vacuum was the main reason for the failure of the advanced groups on the west bank of the river. Experienced leaders of the past learned this harsh lesson well, giving data collection top priority. A commander's blindness in assessing the situation inevitably leads to a loss of control over the situation as a whole. Objective information about the surrounding factors has always been and remains the main condition for successful planning. The transience of triumphs is another structural lesson of the fall of 1966. The outstanding success of Anglo-Saxon logistics turned out to be only a prelude to their final reorganization. The joy of the accomplished task lasted only a few days before a new superhuman march was required. The stability of any system often hangs by a thread and depends on a random combination of external circumstances. Processes do not tolerate delay and always punish those who stop after their first achievement. Readiness to respond immediately to new challenges is the key to the survival of any complex organization. The loss of control over the Scandinavian forces became an example of the fragility of structures tied to a single leader. Early medieval systems relied exclusively on the personal authority of local leaders. The departure of such a link meant the immediate collapse of all coordination and the disintegration of the group into its constituent parts. Such models were replaced by pragmatic management schemes with duplication of functions and a clear hierarchy. The Norman system brought precisely such a more institutional and sustainable model of leadership to England. The era of systems dependent on a single element was irrevocably consigned to the past of organizational development. Stamford Bridge remains a classic case of macro management, where mobility and planning prevailed over mass. This bridge connected two organizational eras, becoming the last triumph of the old school of resource management. The dramatic events of that September day are forever inscribed in the history of structural logistics development. Analysis of this process provides rich material for studying the nature of efficiency, the cost of error, and the role of systems. The past continues to demonstrate strict patterns and examples of large-scale projects of antiquity. It is only important to be able to correctly extract this data, hidden behind the strict figures of old reports. We have examined in detail each stage of one of the most incredible logistical and tactical examples of the past. The Battle of Stamford Bridge proved that coordination, speed of march, and strict discipline can overcome any obstacle. This episode became a vivid demonstration of the capabilities of an organized structure in the face of an impending change in the administrative format. Please suggest topics for future videos related to logistics and the organization of large-scale projects in ancient times in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new detailed analyses of historical management systems.